sciences. Now, chemical and physical sciences is one of those subjects that builds on another parallel course we have and is also taught at the master's level as well. So it's an interesting subject. People balk at chemical and physical sciences because they seem to think of it as hard science. And that's why I've made a couple of the decisions that I've made in terms of providing this course to you. And I'll explain to you now about, for instance, some of the downloads and some of the registrations I've asked you to do in the first week or two of course. So we're going to, again, be talking about inquiry and constructivist teaching. And again, we're going to be working from learner representations. And anyone who's had a look at both of our assessment items, has anyone looked at the assessment items yet?
I have Colin, it's Maxine. I actually
Hello, Maxine.
Hello, how are you? Sorry, I've just had trouble trying to get on the Zoom session, but I did start to look at it today. I'm just getting my head around it, and because I'm doing practice terms, so I'm going to try and combine it with my crack and Lovely. Well, look, feel free to ask any questions as I'm going through today's session because, as I explained to you in the video online on the Moodle, the first assessment task is due at the end of week 5. Okay, so it's really pretty much get up, run and sprint and get going with it. So we'll talk about how to do that today. So a couple of things. We're talking about constructivist teaching. And I've sent everybody another email. So again, TASAC have just sent me through the new link number, and that's how I've been able to send it out to people. So hopefully, I don't know what that confusion was, but I'll try and get to the bottom of it tomorrow when people are back in their offices. But we're going to look at inquiry and constructivist teaching, and again, that's what we're talking about for the Australian curriculum. And we know the constructivist approach is all about working with the social and cultural capital of the learner. And that accounts for differentiation because not every learner comes in with the same level of social and cultural capital. So we can talk about scientific principles, and it may be religious differences, it may be cultural differences, it may purely be knowledge differences or ability differences, but some learners are simply not going to get it. And so we're going to have to work with constructing understanding at a range of different levels. Now we're going to focus on things called representations. As you can see one on the left-hand side there. Now, early year educators will be really, really at home with this stuff because you can look at a kid's drawing and you can, it's like a fingerprint. You can work out what's going on in their lives. And this little one here, a year 3 representation, we can see that this student largely has brought to the year 3 classroom a lot of outside understanding about science. We can see test tubes. We can see someone in a white coat. That person is not gendered. So we also know that gender is not an issue here. We can see some clouds and puffs. We can see little flasks. We can see obviously hot chemicals and hot substances and liquids as notated by the red colours. And in the middle of it all, we can see this child figure or character manipulating these things. So this is quite an elaborated view of science. And this is something that we would work with. Something like this would be ideal for us for assessment task number 2. So these representations, number 1, these representations represent embedded understandings. Now, not all understandings of science are scientific. For instance, the moon rose. Now, the moon doesn't rise. And because of these kinds of connotations, we have things called misconceptions. Now, Basil Bernstein, a fabulous British philosopher and educationalist, talked about these as codes. And he said that in every communication is coded. We know we can go back to Wittgenstein in the 1920s and talk about coded communications. Words cue a memory in our brain. That memory or that image cues a meaning. This is Wittgenstein's very, very famous theory. And of course, Bernstein built on that, and he talked about codes. So he said we have 2 different types of codes, really stripping it down to its simple level. We've got dominant codes, okay, and one of those is elaborate and one of those is restricted. So what Bernstein is saying here about science and about chemical and physical sciences is there's a dominant code, an elaborate code, where the clever kids or the kids close to science or the kids with really bright intellect, they're going to move through science a lot more quickly than kids who've got a restricted code. And a restricted code, for instance, can be something that's removed. Something that's removed from the student's framework. So it's
it's all happening today, isn't it? So it's really, you know, Bernstein talked about, for instance, hip-hop is a restricted code. Someone of my age and danceability, for instance, would not really get very much out of hip-hop, whereas someone a lot younger than me, of perhaps a different culture with a different worldview, would get a lot. For them, it would be an elaborated code. For me, it's a restricted code. So it's not that the code's dominant for the world, it's just dominant for individuals. And our work here also links to Vygotsky's 1961, which he actually wrote in 1921, about the zone of proximal development. And this is the trench where elaboration takes place as a teacher. Your goal is to work as the more capable other. That's all. Often we put pressure on ourselves in science to be the expert. We do not need to be the expert. All we need to do is work and use our skills to be the more capable other. So we're going to talk about the weekly Zoom format and time, and hopefully we get off to a better start than we have this week. But I'm sure we'll get to the bottom of that. So it's going to be 6 o'clock every Tuesday, and it's not the non-teaching week. So don't worry about coming during the non-teaching week. You'll probably be so busy on your other assessment items. This is one of the reasons why I actually put this subject at the end of week 5, to free you up and so you can stagger and stretch out the rest of your assessment. So we've got 3 goals each week with the format. We're going to look at the Q&A. And in the forum, I really want you to get in there and put everything. I guarantee you I'll respond within 2 working days, okay, at maximum. Usually a lot quicker. Sometimes I'm online at the time. Not that I live online, but please, any concerns related to the Q&A forum, put them in there. Each week I'm going to talk about links to assessment. Now, anyone who's been onto the subject website, you will see clearly already that, you know, it's pretty much geared. The first 5 weeks are geared very much towards setting you up for your first assessment task. And each week in the Zoom session, I'll bring out resources and examples that you can acquire, refine, rehearse, and implement. But I don't want to be doing all the work at the Zoom session, you know, and I acknowledge that ownership, this is your session. So I'm employing here what we call the contributory model of e-learning. And it comes from Betty Collis, who recently passed away, actually, and Bert van Moonen. And they're 2 Dutch educators, quite brilliant educators. They worked in the field of IT. But you can see here in their little diagram that down here in the left-hand corner, we can see, if I got to use my highlighter, obviously there's going to be some problems there again. But we can see here that we've got a set of axes. And in the axes, we've got the class and what happens in the Zoom session and in the forums, which I'm going to use probably 2 or 3 compulsory forums this term, particularly geared towards assessment, to encourage you to get the assessment right and to share assessment and get as much feedback as you can. So on a vertical axis, we can see that we've got, you know, little or no human communication, and here we've got full COP communication and reflection. So we've got the, you know, here we've got the engagement side, and over here we've got the content. So we've got communication and content, and based on the interaction between those 2 things, we have learning. So at the moment, we're starting with a Moodle. We've got an information repository, and then we're going to put some content into that. Yep, definitely chemical and physical sciences, that's what we're doing. And we're then blending that with a whole range of activities, contribution activities, which are designed to stretch you out of your comfort zone and get you working through that material so that by the end of the course, we have actually created a community of understanding that we are working towards chemical and physical sciences, not to being experts, but to being teachers, people able to teach those sciences. And that is our goal. And we do that by moving, first of all, through, you know, really just straight repository content, online stuff, documents, readings. If you look at assessment task 1, there's 5 or 6 of them set. We're then going to work through and convert those readings into understandings. So that ultimately, when we give our assessment back, we're at this end of the curve here, where we're talking about co-constructed content and meaning. We will leave this course, hopefully, as proficient teachers of chemistry and physical sciences. That's our goal. So from the Q&A each week, it's important that you post in there, because I will actually put my lecture together from there and the Zoom session together from the Q&A. And so we look at the theoretical frameworks this week that underpin science education, and really they're explicitly in inquiry. Anyone who's done the other science units would know that it's about inquiry learning. We know that in week 1, sorry, someone asking a question there? In the week 1 material, if you read Loxley's couple of recommended chapters, you see that Loxley actually refers to 6 different types of inquiry learning. So often when we talk about inquiry learning, we can't assume that we're just talking about one thing. Okay, we're actually talking about a family of things. Inquiry learning has at least 6 definitions, and we'll get round to those as we progress through weeks 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the course, and hopefully you'll be able to use them in your assessment to effect. So we're looking at theoretical frames that underpin science, and we're talking about motivation and challenge and engagement. Okay, so that we can make scientists, as Piaget said in 1962, we can make them scientists in their own lives. So to do this, okay, we need to make you teachers of science in your own life. So there's 2 things I've asked, okay, this week, and one is that you please enroll or register with the Science by Doing website. This is a goldmine for you, and it's free, and it will come with you wherever you go in your life. But when you do register, don't register as a student, register as a teacher, because the teacher gives you registration, gives you free access to a whole range of teacher resources and professional learning resources, and they're very, very good. By week 3, I also ask you to download the Chemical Maze app from iTunes or Google Apps. It's about $7.99, and the reason why, again, I want to point out to you that science is not something that's out there. Science is actually something that walks around every student, that hangs around you like a little biosphere. So, and what we have to do is find little tools, techniques, and ways of tapping into that science. And Chemical Maze is perfect for a non-scientist. Does anyone use Chemical Maze already? Mari, Jodie, anyone?
Oh yes, I have it on my phone already.
Fantastic, Jodie. What do you use it for?
I was looking into eating like additive free and looking at all the nasty numbers on ingredients of things.
Yeah.
And
how do you find it? Do you find it's improved your food science?
it's improved my children's like behaviour wise.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the reason I was using it for you.
Fabulous. Well, these are the sorts of applications we're talking about. Why should we worry about quantum theory when we can actually look at science in our lives? For instance, the lipstick you put on your face, the shampoo you put on your hair, what you clean your car with, all those lovely smells. You know, I bought a cologne for my car the other day, believe it or not, which is called New Leather. Can you imagine the chemicals in that? The chemicals in paint, all of these different things in the science that we're actually employing when we look at this stuff. Chemical Maze brings all of this home, and it turns us into scientists. It turns us into investigators. And these are great little apps. And the reason why I'm suggesting, please enroll in Scoodle, get your access to Scoodle, get your Chemical Maze, and also get enrolled in Science by Doing, because they're going to have applications far beyond this unit. So the Moodle website, there's a little still of it. As you can see, we've got the weekly Zoom session links along here, and I do not know what happened with those. It's not happened before, so I'll certainly pick that up. Jessica, you actually feature in this still. Thank you for that. And this is what the page looks like. So when you get in there, you can see that we've got the traditional unit profile. We've got our 2 assessment tasks, and then we go through the blocked weekly sessions. At the moment, I've made 4 of them available. By the end of the week, all of the first 5 will be available for you because they connect to the first assessment task. Working through those modules, yes, I mean, the first week I agree there's a few chapters of reading, but then again in the next couple of weeks, we actually go back to those chapters. We're not reading new ones, we're going back to them, and we're then using those readings and the chapters for our assessment. So each week as we jump into the unit, we find that there is a week of work, and in that week of work, I've put what I call a flip bit. So there are 2 parts to the weekly learning. There's an ebook. You link into the ebook, and it's got the flip bit. The flip bit is the bit that you do before you come to this tutorial. The learning bit is the bit that you do after. So we're basically trying to do a little bit of a flipped classroom here. And all they are is Word documents. And what they do is they just guide your reading. Now, I don't want you to feel bad about that because, I mean, for me, I don't think that's a great pedagogy. But I acknowledge that I'm working with busy people, and I acknowledge that we don't see each other every day. And one question I commonly get is, what should I be doing now? So I've put together these weekly reading guides, and you can just open them up, save them to your desktop, and type into them. Your answers don't have to be detailed. They don't have to be rich theoretical answers. But you will find, just by writing these things down and going through the structured thinking that I've put in there for you, that it's going to actually connect to your assessment, and you'll be asking questions about your assessment that are relevant, helpful, and are going to work. So for each week, you've got, you know, and as they get closer to week 5, they're getting less and less work, of course, to free you up then to work on the assessment task itself. But each week has a guided reading guide, a structured reading guide. And then beyond that, I take you on a little journey where we look at some learning applications of some ICT resources or some of the theory and practice that we've talked about in the learning guides. So they're the flip bits. And by the end of the course, you should have 11 of those all typed up with your answers in them, your 2 assignments. You will be, happy, in a really good position to walk off into the science, the physical and chemical sciences sunset, and have a great time as a teacher. There is no reason to fear this content, even though I agree with you, it can appear to be quite complex. So the weekly learning tasks, they're embedded in the Moodle. And of course, we do first of all the flip bit, and then we get into our weekly tasks. So that we follow initially, on the web page or on the Moodle, you'll see that there's learning outcomes and there's quick key content. And so each week you jump in there and it refocuses your brain. There's little learning mnemonics and cues, like task, activity, telling you, okay, this is a do thing. I've got to do something here. You don't have to do them all. My message is there's plenty of work in there and plenty of content, but every week is not going to be the same for you. So don't punish yourself. I think you have to do them there every week, but they're there as a guide to the sorts of content and material that you need to cover, okay, to be in a really good position to do your assessment. So at the end of this week, list the places where students made a connect to science. And we know from our first little representation there that they bring so much to a classroom that the teachers never taught. We know this in all of their disciplines. And unfortunately, science is pretty special because it's got the most misconceptions associated with it than any other discipline. We also want to describe the ways in which student scientific understanding can be effectively enhanced in the classroom. And again, we're talking there about diagnostic assessment here. And then third point we're going to do is explain some of the different pedagogical approaches in science. As we said, it's inquiry-based teaching. Since 2012, and ACARA switched to the new Australian curriculum, science has been all about inquiry-based learning. However, it's just about 80% of schools that have engaged with that agenda, with that pedagogy. A lot of science is still taught as facts, figures and numbers. And hence, it's no wonder we're seeing declining numbers in science courses in high schools and universities. Our key terms: science, contextualizing, pedagogical frameworks, and the big one, misconceptions. What is learned has only been partially understood or completely misunderstood. And in the Kamburi reading, it's quite a good reading, they talk about the tabula rasa, about children as blank sheets needing to be filled. Our very first task is to actually, discredit that assumption. They are not blank sheets. They bring so many understandings and frameworks, cultural, social, as well as misconceptions to science. So where do they see science? Okay, we're talking about David Attenborough and documentaries, one of my favourites. Comics, full of science. Movies and time, space, time, magic. No one can hear you scream in space. Books, Harry Potter. Everyday life, we've got rainfall, bread and butter falling, the butter side down, drought, flood, cyclone, seasons, all kinds of things. Families also provide explanations. We've all had that uncle, haven't we? Who's every time he breaks wind, he walks up to you first and says, pull my finger. You pull the finger and next thing you know, out pops this massive fart. He chuckles away thinking it's funny every time he does it. Okay, and of course that becomes the family's rule. That's a scientific explanation, and believe it or not, that's come up from kids before. ACS, the cross-curricular links. The Australian curriculum's got 7 general capabilities. Can you recall what they are? It's also got a range of curriculum areas. And even though science is one of those curriculum areas, we can't be so naive and so negligent as to treat science purely as a discipline in its own right. It belongs with other disciplines. It sits side by side, and we have to teach it from that perspective as if we are sitting inside that discipline with the learners. Okay, so we talk about contextualising science with inquiry-based learning. I'll get rid of that. And this is, from the Science by Doing guide. I urge you to get into that. By the time we get to week 5, there's a fabulous online module that they take you through where you can play with a simulated class and you can do all sorts of simulated activities. So it's really, really good if you get in there and have got the time to use it. If not, don't, because it'll stress you and distract you from your focus. But there are some fabulous things to do in there. It's much more than giving students the opportunity to develop inquiry skills. Okay, it actually fits in there. And when we talk about inquiry-based learning, we know it's got different stages. Here we've got a couple of different forms of inquiry learning. We've got the teacher-led inquiry learning, we've got what we call guided inquiry, right through to open inquiry, where the students are generating the questions, the students are generating the method of inquiry, the teacher is there as a resource to support, and the students then go off and apply all of these things in an open world. And we've got, again, all these different strategies, some of which you will have used on prac, concept mapping. Okay, you know, we're going to do one of those in week 3 when we introduce the physical sciences for the first time, just to see, you know, how you can go about imagining your teaching. Brainstorming, envoys, okay, where one person goes to a meeting with other envoys and they discuss a particular scientific question, and then you report back to your home group or your home people. Okay, gallery walks, where you go through some kinesthetic stations, jigsaws, POE, predict, observe, explain. Inquiry-based learning, you know, it can be applied to a single activity, to a sequence, to a unit, or to a whole curriculum unit. So we're going to, you know, by the time we finish this course, we're going to be considering closed inquiry and open inquiry. And we start down here with assessment task 1, closed inquiry. This is teaching as assessment, where the teacher is grinding away figures and facts, trying to work towards what student learner understandings are in a way that they can identify the misconceptions and then learn how to begin to teach. Because only a good teacher teaches what children don't know. Okay, you don't teach what they already do know. Okay. Oh, we've got some function back here. This is great. 3-stage framework. And again, we'll talk a lot about Bibby's 5 E's. We're not going to limit ourselves to the 5 E's, because anyone who's looked at the Loxley text already will know that Loxley adopts the traditional three-stage inquiry model. And you know, that's quite appropriate, because you can see what Bibby does. It breaks it down into the 3 stages. And we can see in Loxley that he talks about the exploratory stage, the redescribing stage, and the application stage. Okay, in other stages, you know, we've got the deconstruction stage. Okay, we've got the reconstruction stage. And application is all about co-construction. How do we try this out in other contexts? Let me guide you. So we've got the 5 E's. Again, you can see the first 2 E's, engage, explore, fit in there in exploration. Redescribing is all about explaining, formative assessment. Application, we can see here that it's both formative and summative assessment. As the student moves through science inquiry skills, having the skills to apply concepts in outside stages and applications. I'm sure all of this, a lot of it, is revision to you. In the subject Moodle this week, Professor Dennis Goodrum makes a concerted appearance in this course. He should be on a commission, the poor old guy. I met Dennis last year, and he's a lovely, lovely man and a committed educator. So I often use his little vignettes right throughout the study and the Moodle, because really we can't afford to pay him to turn up live. So what we do is we put the next best thing, we put down some of his recorded vignettes. So look out for him on the Moodle. Okay, and he talks about the inquiry model. There's a short video there, so you can read it, you can see it, and you can hear it. Okay, you can get it in multiple modes. We then introduce stage 1, and I've put up a little vignette because sometimes you think you know, again, misconceptions. You think you know what stage 1 of inquiry is, but it's always good to watch an experienced teacher doing it, because this is really stage 1 of inquiry. This is assessment task number 1. Where you're diagnosing a misconception, okay, and applying a strategy, a structured strategy, to your diagnosis method. And also on the Moodle this week is you know, him working through the student activity. In the first stage, stage 1, he's very much, you know, the sage on the stage. He's up the front. He's calling questions. He's using wait time. He's drawing conclusions. He's using direct, open and closed questions. All of these techniques are flying around the room. He's very, very good at what he does. Stage 2, he becomes the meddler in the middle, where the group work happens, and he adopts a different set of skills. Watch him as he moves around that. Just remind yourself what it's like, what, you know, the different roles that a teacher needs to take in an inquiry classroom. You can't simply be the one personality. You must morph. You must go with the stages. And the final stage, again, is the discussion stage, where he becomes a guide on the side, where he sits down and he reflects on the learning. You know, why did you think that? What could be done with this? What if you did this differently? So he's working through the guide on the side stage here in the discussion stage. Now, these are all metaphors, and they're little videos for you. And the goal here is to try and get you in there and looking at this material so that quickly you get in there, quickly we're ready to start thinking about assessment task number 1, and we're moving into that space as pre-service teachers. Again, the 5 E's, the inquiry approach starts with the ACS, moves into a school plan, and then gets extrapolated onto individual student learning goals. We've got our 5 E's, engage, explore, explain, elaborate, evaluate. We've then got the features that they bring out. Teacher motivates at the engage stage, gets student interested in the topic, and elicits any prior knowledge. That is assessment task number 1 right there. Then we go on to explore. Okay, the teacher presents and encourages. The students investigate. The students may use some common language. We're talking about literacy and language frameworks here. And students are encouraged to ask further questions so that they can set up their exploration. Explanation is the next phase. Look at a phenomena under investigation using multiple sources. And again, here we talk about collaborative learning. We are again building scientific language and trying to get students to use it. Now in week 3, I'll give you a lovely example of Huey the helicopter. Okay, it's just a brilliant little vignette of a teacher who is working through that explain stage and doing extremely well. Elaborate, build on concepts, attempt to resolve new or related problems. Students use previously introduced scientific language. Again, you're getting that the language competency building, the lingua franca of the sciences are building. And students may develop links previously unnoticed between other concepts, and ultimately through to evaluation, where the teacher will set a task and then, again, we talk about assessment of learning, the 3rd stage, when students move through to the summative stage. It's a busy course. Assessment becomes the focus after week 5. Up to week 5, it's about diagnosis. We're up here at the engage stage. What is motivating? What is interesting? Where are your learners at? We then pretty quickly move down to the 4 and 5s. We look at formative assessment, and ultimately we look at summative assessment in our 2nd assessment task. So it follows that assessment flow. And it's all built around what we think are the characteristics of good teaching. So we start with engagement, learning and understanding at the core. And from there we move out, ask questions of yourself, the curriculum and your students over here on the right. Develop your own understanding of concepts and of teaching. This is what we're going to be trying to do with this unit. This is the what we call the contributing student model. Identify and prepare resources, including safety awareness, particularly associated with science. And this is one of the reasons why I love the flipped classroom, because it actually helps deal with safety issues. A lot of things you can do online and through simulations. It's great. It's not all about laboratory safety. And finally up here, evaluate learning and respond through reflection. And this is what we call that double loop learning. Chris Agiris talked about double loop learning in the 1980s, 1990s. And again, he talked about triple loop learning in the noughties, in 2000. So the characteristics of good teaching. You've probably got your own words for describing them, but we've got engage, learning for understanding, question yourself, the curriculum and students, develop your own concepts, your own understanding of concepts and of teaching. And that way you can use them. One of the readings that we're looking at this week is Chiafalo and Wiley that I've set for assessment task number 1. They talk about the fact that most teachers will only teach science that they feel comfortable with. So there's a whole lot of science that we don't feel comfortable with that we don't teach. Go figure. How is that possible? Identify and prepare resources, including safety awareness, and evaluate learning and respond through learning. So some things to think about for you. Most of you are at stage 2 or 3 of your program now. By the time you finish stage 4, you'll be working on a thing called a GTPA, where you'll be linking all of your teaching back to the teaching standards, about 21 of them, I think there are. So by the time you finish the course, you've got to have a really good idea of what your strengths are. In the classroom where you've been the sage on the stage, the meddler in the middle, the guide on the side, what skills have you used? What approaches have you employed? What are your core pedagogies? How can you switch? How do you differentiate? How do you measure and attain, diagnose misconceptions and then work towards those through questioning? All of these are the standards, the story that you'll need to tell by the end of your teaching degree. So let's start thinking that way now. Let's start thinking and assessing ourselves as we go through this unit in a science classroom, how we are going to actually demonstrate some of those motions as a teacher. In the course, we link a lot to Bloom, and particularly in the first 5 weeks, because this is how we, if you read the assessment item 1, it says prepare a diagnostic test. Now, diagnostic tests can take a range of forms. They can be written, they can be spoken, they can be an interview. Keifalo and Wiley talk about the interview technique for diagnostics. Have a look at those readings, because really by week 2, you need to be thinking seriously about who your learners are going to be and what form your diagnostic test is going to take, because you need to design it and you then need to link it to the learning that you're trying to target. So we use Bloom a lot for this, you know, and really we're working in a lot of diagnosis. We're working down here at knowledge and comprehension, because remember, we're starting a unit off, and you don't start a unit off up here at evaluation. We essentially work from the ground up. This is, you know, this is constructivism. We're working from the ground up, and our goal is to build on existing knowledge and extend, apply, analyze, create the synthesis points, and ultimately lead them to use through evaluation. So we're working from the ground up. You know, so assessment task number 1 is largely going to be about knowledge and comprehension, how you will apply diagnostics to work out where learners stand, what they know, and how they know it. Here's a little example. Again, because I've mentioned Keifalo and White a few times, they're one of the readings I set for you. And here's a little example of you know, a student who was completing this assignment and decided that, you know, they're really interested in the notion of sun and nighttime, lightness and dark. It's in there in the ACS. It is one of the standards that you write to in your curriculum documents and statements. And you'll also notice, for instance, that it's an earth science. And yet this unit is called Chemical and Physical Sciences. Relax. You were able to choose from all 4 substrands for assessment task number 1. I'm not going to limit you to chemical and physical sciences, because actually we haven't done any yet. So to set an assessment item on work you haven't done, we're probably going to measure how much you don't know rather than how much you do know. So feel free to tackle physical and chemical sciences. Some of you may love it. You may have a real passion for it. However, you don't have to. You can do as this student has done, and you can focus on earth science. And she was really interested to find out, you know, with her year 3 learners, where does the sun go when it's nighttime? And you can see she's actually come up with a diagnostic test there that looks at 5 different questions. What does it look like when the sun disappears? Question 3, why does the sun disappear, down here? I didn't put the results in. Question 4, is the sun important to us? Why? And question 5, she gets them to do something different. Can you draw me a picture? Build me a model. Show me a representation of where you think the sun goes when it disappears at night. And you can see here, for instance, she's got 4 students, A, B, C, and D. So in assessment task number 1, we don't need a whole lot of students. You don't need a full class. You can babysit. You can be a member of a cub group, a scout group, you know, Girl Guides. It can be children's friends, brothers and sisters. But what you're doing is you're doing exactly what Piaget did. Now, Piaget never had a theory that came outside his own 3 children. All he did was observe them. He employed a method called repeated measures. He just observed his own children. And from that observation and the time spent with them, he produced some of the most insightful cognitive psychology that we've known. So, you know, here's what we're asking ourselves to do for assessment task number 1. Find a small group of students. Develop an instrument. That instrument must test science understanding. And you must be able to, it's diagnostic. When a student says something like, okay, where does the sun go when it's night? The student says, it goes round. Well, what does that mean? Well, very simple language applied, says the teacher, verbalizing a mental model. Okay, so it's a very basic level. The sun goes into the clouds. Learner has used words to confirm her observation ideas. So we've got some confirmation moves here. It goes to America. That's an interesting response. Here the student has some knowledge of the connection with the sun's movement scientifically. So in other words, where is America? Is America east, west? Is the student right? Where the sun goes. And D, around to the other side of the earth. Okay, so now we're starting to get some insight here into where the sun goes, into the cycles of day and night, and in the rotations of the planet. So as a teacher, you'd look at these, and then you'd look at consecutive questions and answers, and all of a sudden you'd know where to pitch your teaching. You'd know what language and linguistics and literacy you would need to focus on in this particular unit of study. And all of a sudden, there's certain things that you would teach and must teach, and there's things that you wouldn't. That's assessment task number 1. Okay? That's what you need to do. Come up with that kind of inquiry process as a teacher, where you are, assessment as teaching, okay, or teaching as assessment. So Chiafalo and Wiley talk about what makes a good diagnostic item. Read their article. It's not that long. I've tried to set short articles. There's one there by Barke, 2009, B-A-R-K-E. It's on chemistry, and to be honest, it's a little bit dense. Dense is in lexically and conceptually dense. So it can be hard to understand at times, and at other times it's brilliant. So pick an article that suits you, but Chiafalo and Wiley are good, okay? They say in the end that validity is a critical issue in diagnostic testing. You know, you must be testing the concepts you're going to be teaching, or you must be testing the knowledge frameworks. If you're not adopting a valid diagnostic test, then chances are you'll just be blowing in the wind. Okay, so it's got validity is really important, even though it's not NAPLAN, even though it's not a high stakes test. Validity is still important. The item that you're testing must relate in a relevant and age-appropriate way to that topic. And we saw from the previous questionnaire, you know, where does the sun go at night? That is age-relevant. That relates to the topic, and you know that diagnosis actually revealed quite a few different learner understandings. The teacher's not using the item to score or grade. Okay, so it's about clearing insight into your thinking. That's a third thing that Chiafalo and Wiley talk about. The fourth conclusion, items will be administered individually. You can have 2, 3, 4, 5 or more distractor options. So the more distractors you have, okay, enables you to then think about where they're making their knowledge errors or the misconceptions are occurring, okay? Discriminators are where you put in more than one correct answer. So one answer may be more correct than another. And that's point number 5. You know, to get really good discussion going in the classroom, you may have one almost correct answer, one correct, one completely wrong, and what we call a distractor. That is a right answer to another question in your little diagnostic scenario. The aim, the take-home message, ensure that the incorrect answer choices are connected to incorrect or incomplete understandings. Your correct answer must be correct and relate to complete science understandings, okay? And this is what's going to provide insight into learning. So, you know, we're getting straight here onto assessment task number 1. I think it's important because we've got a 5-week lead-up period. And a couple of the other things we talk about this week, children's movies and their inaccuracies. You've got to love them because Disneyland, as much fun as Nemo is and as cute as he is responsible for so many science misconceptions. There's noise in space, okay? There is noise in space. Yeah, that's the point I'm trying to make here. In Armageddon, the space explosions are deafening. Okay, sorry, there's no noise in space. That's the point I'm trying to make here. And in Armageddon, the space explosions are deafening, which is really interesting. In 2001, A Space Odyssey, Hal the computer was, you know, whining through space. C-3PO, one of the great error-prone zones, of the curriculum. The possibility of navigating an asteroid field is approximately 3,270 to 1. It's actually 1,000,000 to 1. They've redone the stats on that C-3PO, so he's wrong. You can hold your breath forever. And again, the Phantom Menace, Titanic, Gravity, you know, clearly there's a limit to how long you can hold your breath. He's going to hit the laser with his sword. Now, don't you just love that one? Okay, where the laser and the sword clash and you get this bzzz and you get the smoke and okay, it doesn't actually happen. Alien computers run Windows. Did you know that? That's absolutely fascinating. And if you're moving in space, you will not stop if your engines get blown up. Whatever Star Trek for the Voyager home may tell you. Okay, the baddie in 2002 James Bond film, Die Another Day, one I really like, had gene therapy to replace his DNA and change his appearance. It's not how it works. Okay, and yet there's a very successful movie. And a 9mm bullet weighs less than 12 grams. If it's traveling at 400 meters a second, about right, it will knock an 80-kilogram man backwards at around 3 centimeters per second. So often you see the hero get shot once, he gets shot twice, he spins around, he gets shot a third time. We do need to question some of these assumptions and the science behind them. And the reason why I'm sharing those is not because obviously they're glaringly and terribly wrong, but because they're accepted. There's so much that we accept uncritically. You know, are we really being scientists in this world? If we were, then would we really be paying attention to aliens that use Windows? It's a really interesting question. The final point I want to make for the week, before I open to questions from you, we talked earlier about, and you'll get this from Dennis Goodrum too, as he talks about teaching science as fact or inquiry. And here we've got two very similar units. One's called Investigating Pond Life, and the other is called Investigating Pond Life. But only one of them is inquiry. And we can see the one on the left, materials are a little bit different, less materials. Pre-prepared labelled slides of pond-dwelling organisms. It's the sort of language kids love, isn't it? Microscopes, science workbooks, pencils and erasers. Method, ask students to work in pairs. Each pair collects and sets up a microscope. Distribute slides, allow students time to investigate them using microscopes. Ask them to make a labelled drawing of each of the slides. To conclude the activities, ask students to predict how much organism would move. Remind students that movement is a key feature of living things. Sounds like a hoot. On the other side, on the right-hand side, materials, pond water, blank slides, petri dishes, pipettes, microscopes, resources which identify and label freshwater organisms, posters, books, websites, resources, not the actual things themselves, science workbooks, your journals, pencils and erasers. What to do? Get students into group of 3. Why? Because 3 is an odd number. Things happen in 3s. Ask students to brainstorm what sort of organisms they would expect to find in their local pond. So what is our scope? What would be the features of these organisms that would enable them to live in that environment? They record their thinking. Each trio collects and sets up a compound and a light microscope. Okay, sounds good. Students use the microscopes to investigate samples of pond water and identify living things. They record their observation of each organism, 0.5, and make label drawings. Encourage them to pay particular attention to the key features of living things, for example, movement. Students use the resources to identify and name each organism they see in the water. Conclude the activity with a class discussion. Prompt questions may include, how did you identify that an object in the water was a living organism? How many features of living organisms, movement, use of energy, respond to and adapt to changes in the environment, did you observe in your water organisms? Think about it. Right side, left side. Where would you prefer to do science? What kind of science are you going to do as a teacher? What kind of processes are you going to instill? And what sort of questions are you going to ask?